A lawyer abandons a millionaire CEO in court. But a poor little girl arrives, saying, "I'm my daddy's lawyer," and exposes a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud inside the CEO's own company. Before anything else, if this video finds you well, wherever you are, let me know how it made you feel at the end. The October morning air was crisp as it filtered through the tall windows of the Manhattan courthouse. Richard Blackwood, 52 and worth, 300 million sat at the defendant's table. He watched his world, his entire empire crumble before his very eyes. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Armani suit immaculate. But sweat beaded on his forehead, a stark contrast to the cool, air-conditioned room. "Your Honor," Thomas Sterling announced, rising slowly from his chair, "regretfully must withdraw from this case due to unforeseen circumstances." The seasoned attorney's voice cracked as he spoke. His 48 years of legal experience were suddenly unable to mask his sheer terror. Richard's head snapped toward his lawyer. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. But Thomas was already gathering his papers, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Richard. I can't do this anymore." Without another word, he strode toward the exit, leaving behind 20 years of friendship and the biggest case of his career. Judge Patricia Morrison frowned from her bench, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Sterling, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply abandon your client in the middle of proceedings." "I understand, Your Honor, but ethical concern prevent me from continuing," Thomas replied. He didn't even look back as he pushed through the heavy courtroom doors. The gallery erupted in a storm of whispers. Richard sat frozen, his empire teetering on the very edge of collapse. The charges against him were devastating: embezzlement, fraud, tax evasion. Blackwood Industries, his life's work, faced utter bankruptcy. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Morrison said sternly, "you'll need new representation before we can proceed." "Your Honor," a clear, young voice called out from the back of the courtroom. "I'll represent Mr. Blackwood." Every single head in the room turned. A teenage girl walked down the center aisle, her confidence unwavering. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a borrowed blazer that was clearly too big for her slight frame, and her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor. Emma Rodriguez was 16 years old, but her brown eyes held a fire, determination that made the entire room fall silent. "I'm sorry, young lady," Judge Morrison said gently, her tone softening, "but this is a serious legal proceeding. You can't just—" "I'm Emma Rodriguez, Your Honor," the girl interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "and I'm not here to represent Mr. Blackwood. I'm here to represent my daddy in his case against Mr. Blackwood." Richard's face went white, the color draining from it completely. The name Rodriguez hit him like a physical blow. Miguel Rodriguez, the accountant he had destroyed years ago, the man who discovered too much. "Your daddy?" the judge asked, her confusion evident. Emma's eyes never left Richard's face as she spoke, her gaze like steel. "My father, Miguel Rodriguez, was Mr. Blackwood's senior accountant until 2018. He discovered that Mr. Blackwood has been stealing millions from his own company, hiding money in offshore accounts and filing false tax returns for over a decade." The courtroom exploded. Reporters frantically scribbled notes while photographers' flashes captured Richard's shocked expression. But Emma wasn't finished. "I may so only be 16, Your Honor," she continued, her voice ringing with purpose. "But I've spent 2 years studying every law book I could find, preparing for this exact moment. My family lost everything because my father tried to do the right thing. Mr. Blackwood made sure Daddy couldn't find work anywhere. He threatened our family and destroyed our lives to protect his dirty secrets." She opened a worn backpack and pulled out a thick, heavy folder. "I have copies of financial documents, email communications, and recorded conversations. They prove Mr. Blackwood has embezzled over $40 million from Blackwood Industries. Money that should have gone to employee pensions, to healthcare, benefits, and to honest investors. Richard's own lawyer training kicked in despite his shock. Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot represent. Actually, Emma said calmly, cutting him off. In the state of New York, a person can represent family members in civil proceedings without being a licensed attorney, as long as they're not charging fees. I'm not here as a lawyer, Your Honor. I'm here as Miguel Rodriguez's daughter, seeking justice for what this man did to my family and hundreds of others. Judge Morrison looked intrigued, despite herself. And where is your father now, Miss Rodriguez? Emma's voice broke slightly, for the very first time. He's at home, Your Honor. The stress of what happened, it gave him a heart attack last year. The medical bills. She paused, composing herself, pushing the pain down. We lost our house, our car, everything. Mama works 3 jobs now just to pay for his medications. She turned to face Richard directly, her young voice carrying the weight of years of suffering. But I promised Daddy that one day the truth would come out. Today is that day. Richard Blackwood, the man who'd built an empire on lies and manipulation, found himself speechless. This teenage girl stood before him, holding the evidence that could destroy everything he'd ever worked for. The judge leaned forward, clearly captivated by this unprecedented situation. Miss Rodriguez, while your passion is admirable, this is a complex financial case requiring extensive legal knowledge. Emma smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom, a small but powerful gesture. Your Honor, I may not have a law degree, but I have something Mr. Blackwood's expensive lawyers don't have. She held up the folder again, a symbol of her long fight. I have the truth and 6 years of pure determination to see justice done. As she spoke those words, Richard Blackwood realized that his past had finally caught up with him, delivered by the last person he'd ever expected, the daughter of the man whose life he had destroyed. 6 years earlier, Miguel Rodriguez had been the happiest he'd ever been. At 39, he'd finally achieved his American dream. His accounting degree from community college had landed him a senior position at Blackwood Industries. And for the first time since arriving from El Salvador 20 years ago, his family was comfortable. Mira, Emma, he'd said to his 10-year-old daughter that September evening in 2018. He pointed around their modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Next year we'll have enough saved for a real house with a yard where you can play. Emma had hugged him tight, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. Really, Poppy, with my own room? See, meet, amor. Your own room, painted whatever color you want. Miguel had been working late that particular night, double-checking the quarterly reports before submission. He prided himself on his meticulous attention to detail, a trait that had earned him Richard Blackwood's trust, and a salary that finally allowed his wife, Sophia, to quit her second job at the diner. But it was that same attention to detail that would ultimately destroy everything. The numbers just weren't adding up. Miguel had noticed small discrepancies before. A few thousand here, a missing payment there. But he'd always found logical explanations, computer errors, delayed transactions, normal business fluctuations. This time was different. This time, $43 million was missing. Miguel had stayed until 3:00 a.m. that night, cross-referencing bank statements with company records. The money had been systematically siphoned from employee pension funds, healthcare premiums, and investor deposits over 8 years. Clever accounting tricks made it nearly invisible, but Miguel's trained eye could see the pattern. Shell companies with names deceptively similar to legitimate vendors. Invoices for services that were never rendered. Payments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The more he dug, the more horrified he became. Richard Blackwood wasn't just stealing from the company. He was stealing from the hardworking families who depended on Blackwood Industries for their livelihoods. The next morning, Miguel had requested a private meeting with his boss. He'd practiced the conversation in his head during the subway ride to Manhattan, choosing his words carefully. He respected Mr. Blackwood, considered him a mentor, even a friend. Surely there was an explanation. Miguel? Richard had greeted him, warmly gesturing to the expensive leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. You look tired, my friend. Working too hard again. Mr. Blackwood, I need to discuss some irregularities I found in the financial reports. The warmth vanished from Richard's face. Instantly. What kind of irregularities? Miguel had opened his folder, his hands trembling. Slightly. There are payments to companies I can't verify, transfers that don't match our records. I think someone might be embezzling money from the pension fund. Richard had listened in absolute silence as Miguel explained his findings. His cold blue eyes grew even colder with each horrific detail. When Miguel finished, the room was so quiet they could hear the distant sound of traffic 30 floors below. Miguel, Richard had said, finally his voice deadly calm. You're suggesting that someone in my company is stealing from our employees? Yes, sir. The evidence is clear. We need to contact the authorities. No. The word cut through the air like a blade. We don't need to contact anyone. Miguel felt a wave of confusion. Sir, I don't understand. If we don't report this, you don't understand. Richard had stood slowly, his imposing 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the desk. Let me help you understand, Miguel. You have a beautiful family. A wife, a daughter. They depend on you, don't they? The threat was unmistakable, chilling him to the bone. Miguel's blood had run cold. Mr. Blackwood, please. I'm just trying to do the right thing. The right thing, Richard had repeated, walking around the desk to stand directly behind. Miguel's chair is to forget whatever you think you saw. The right thing is to go home to your family and never speak of this again. But Miguel Rodriguez hadn't built his life by backing down from what was right. His father had died working in fields for pennies so Miguel could have an education. His mother had cleaned houses for 20 years to pay for his college. He wouldn't dishonor their sacrifice by staying silent while innocent people were robbed blind. I can't do that, Mr. Blackwood. These people trust us with their futures, their retirement, their children's health care. Your employment here is terminated. Effective immediately, Richard had interrupted. Security will escort you out. And Miguel, he'd leaned down, his voice a venomous whisper in his ear. If you ever speak about these fictional irregularities to anyone at all, I'll make sure you never work in accounting again. Anywhere. Your family will lose everything. 2 large security guards had appeared as if summoned by magic. Miguel had been marched out of the building he'd entered as a trusted employee just hours before. His box of personal belongings clutched against his chest like a flimsy piece of armor. That night, as he'd explained to Sophia and Emma why he wouldn't be going to work anymore, Miguel had made a decision. A decision that would change their lives forever. He would fight. Somehow, some way, he would make Richard Blackwood pay for what he'd done. He had no idea that 6 years later his 16-year-old daughter would be the one to fulfill that promise. The Queen's Public Library became Emma's second home after her father's heart attack. While other teenagers spent their afternoons at the mall or scrolling through social media, Emma Rodriguez could be found in the law section. She was always surrounded by towering stacks of heavy legal textbooks. You're here again. Mrs. Chen, the elderly librarian, observed one crisp November afternoon in 2023. Don't you have homework from school? Emma looked up from Federal Securities Law, a comprehensive guide, her eyes red from hours of reading. I finished it during lunch, she said quietly. This is more important, Mrs. Chen. had been watching this dedicated teenager for months now. Emma arrived every day after school and stayed until closing. She methodically worked her way through every legal text the library owned. At first, Mrs. Chen had assumed it was for a school project. But projects don't last 8 months. "What exactly are you studying for, dear?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, settling into the chair across from Emma. Emma hesitated. She'd never told anyone about her plan, not even her parents. They had enough to worry about with Papa's medical bills and Mama's exhausting work schedule. "Someone hurt my family," Emma said finally, her voice low. "Someone powerful. And I'm going to stop them." Mrs. Chen studied the young girl's determined face. In her 70 years, she'd learned to recognize that particular look of quiet, unshakable resolve. "And you think the law will help you?" "The law is the only thing that can help us," Emma replied, returning to her book. "Papa always taught me that in America, justice is supposed to be blind. Rich or poor, everyone follows the same rules." But as Emma had discovered, over months of intense study, the reality was far more complicated than Papa's optimistic view. She'd learned about corporate law, securities fraud, and the complex procedures required to bring cases against powerful defendants. She'd studied precedents where whistleblowers had been crushed by expensive legal teams, and cases where justice had been delayed so long that victims died, waiting for a resolution. Most importantly, she'd learned about pro se representation, the right to represent oneself or family members in court without a law license. "If I can't afford a lawyer," Emma had whispered to herself one evening, her breath fogging the library window, "then I'll become one." Not officially, but good enough. Emma had developed a rigorous system. Every day after school, she'd spend 4 hours at the library. Weekends meant 8-hour study, sessions fueled by cheap coffee, and sheer will. She'd filled 17 notebooks with handwritten case summaries, legal procedures, and strategic notes. Her bedroom wall was covered with a timeline of events surrounding Papa's firing, connected by red string like a detective's conspiracy board. The hardest part wasn't learning the law. It was watching her family struggle while she prepared for a battle they didn't even know she was fighting. Papa had aged 10 years in the last 5. The proud, strong man who'd once carried her on his shoulders now moved carefully. One hand was often pressed to his chest, the sound of medications rattling in his shirt pocket. The heart attack had been mild, the doctor said, but combined with years of stress and depression, it had left him fragile. Mama worked at a grocery store from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then she cleaned offices until midnight. Her hands were permanently stained from harsh cleaning chemicals, and she often fell asleep in her chair at night, too exhausted to make it to bed. "Why don't you help your mother more instead of always reading?" Papa had asked once. "Evening." He caught Emma studying contract law at the small kitchen table. Emma had looked up at her father, the man who'd lost everything, trying to do the right thing, and made a decision. "Papa," she'd said, carefully, "what if I told you that someday we could make Mr. Blackwood pay for what he did to us?" Miguel had laughed bitterly, a hollow, painful sound. "Mija, men like Richard Blackwood don't pay for anything. They have lawyers, money, power. People like us, we just survive." "But what if we didn't have to just survive?" Emma had pressed, her voice gaining strength. "What if we could fight back?" Something in her voice had made Miguel look at her more carefully. His little girl wasn't little anymore. At 15, she was taller than her mother, and there was a steely determination in her brown eyes that reminded him of his own mother. A woman who'd never backed down from anything in her life. "Emma, what are you planning?" She'd shown him everything that night. The notebooks, the timeline, the exhaustive legal research. Miguel had been stunned by the depth of his daughter's knowledge, and he was terrified by the magnitude of what she was proposing. "This is too dangerous," he'd whispered, his voice trembling. "Richard Blackwood destroyed me, and I was a grown man with experience. What do you think he'll do to a teenager? He'll underestimate me, Emma had replied simply, with a confidence that defied her age. Just like everyone else does. Now, 8 months later, that preparation was about to be tested in the most public way possible. As Emma sat in that courtroom, facing the man who'd haunted her family's nightmares, she knew that every hour of study, every sacrificed afternoon, every missed social event had led to this very moment. The battle for justice was about to begin. And Emma Rodriguez was ready for war. The evidence that would ultimately bring down Richard Blackwood had been hiding in plain sight for years. It was scattered across a trail of digital breadcrumbs that only someone with Emma's unique perspective could piece together. After that first explosive day in court, Emma had been granted a 2-week continuance to prepare her case properly. Judge Morrison had been skeptical, but was undeniably impressed by the teenager's knowledge of legal procedure. "This is highly unusual," she'd warned, "but I'll allow you to proceed as your father's representative, Miss Rodriguez. Don't make me regret this decision." Emma spent those 2 weeks like a detective obsessed with solving the perfect crime. She'd converted their tiny apartment's living room into a war room, spreading documents across every available surface. Mama had complained about having nowhere to sit, but Papa had watched his daughter work with a growing sense of amazement and pride. "How did you find all this?" Miguel asked one evening. He was examining a bank statement Emma had somehow obtained showing a series of suspicious transfers. "Freedom of Information Act requests," Emma explained, not looking up from her refurbished laptop. "A machine she'd bought with money, saved from babysitting neighborhood children. Blackwood Industries is partially funded by government contracts, which means some of their financial records are public, if you know how to ask for them. But the real breakthrough had come from an unexpected source, Thomas Sterling himself. 3 days after fleeing the courtroom, Richard's former lawyer had appeared at their door at 11 p.m., looking haggard and desperate. Sophia had been terrified, thinking he was there to threaten them. But Emma had recognized something else in his eyes. "Guilt. I can't represent him anymore," Thomas had confessed, slumping into their kitchen chair, like a man carrying the weight of the world. "For 20 years I've been covering for him, telling myself it was just aggressive business tactics. But when I saw you in that courtroom talking about your father," he'd looked at Miguel with genuine remorse, "I remembered why I became a lawyer in the first place." Thomas had brought copies of everything. Internal memos discussing the embezzlement scheme in cold, corporate language. Recordings of Richard's chilling threats against potential whistleblowers. Detailed financial records showing exactly how the money had been funneled and hidden. "This is enough to put him away for 30 years, Thomas had said, placing a thick manila envelope on their small kitchen table. "But Emma, you need to understand. Richard has judges in his pocket, prosecutors who owe him favors. This won't be a fair fight." "I don't need it to be fair," Emma had replied with quiet confidence. "Just need it to be public." She'd spent the next week organizing the evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to ignore. Bank records showing $43 million diverted from employee benefits into personal accounts. Email chains where Richard openly discussed bribing city officials. Audio recordings of him threatening Miguel and 2 other former employees who discovered discrepancies. But Emma's masterstroke was something Thomas couldn't have provided: the human cost. Emma had tracked down 17 families whose lives had been completely destroyed by Richard's theft. Employees who'd lost their pensions after a lifetime of work. Workers whose health insurance had been quietly canceled while they battled cancer. Retirees who discovered their life savings had simply vanished. She'd interviewed each family, recording their heartbreaking stories with her phone. Maria Santos, whose husband had died because they couldn't afford his diabetes medication after their health coverage disappeared. Frank Morrison, who'd lost his house when his pension payments stopped coming. The Patterson family, whose daughter had to drop out of college when her education fund evaporated into thin air. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, Emma had written in her case summary, her words burning with righteous anger. These are real people whose lives were destroyed so one man could buy another yacht. The night before the trial resumed, Emma had sat with her parents at their kitchen table. The evidence was organized in neat stacks around them, a fortress of facts. "Mija," Miguel had said softly, "I'm so proud of you, but I'm also so scared. What you're about to do, it could make our lives even harder." Emma had taken her father's weathered hands in hers. "Papa, you taught me that. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's still the right thing to do." Sophia had been crying quietly, torn between overwhelming pride and paralyzing terror for her daughter's safety. "What if he hurts you, mi amor? What if he does to you what he did to us? Then at least everyone will be watching this time," Emma had replied, her gaze firm. "He can't threaten us in the shadows anymore. Tomorrow the whole world will see who Richard Blackwood really is." As dawn broke over Queens that morning, Emma Rodriguez prepared for the second phase of her battle. A battle against one of the most powerful men in New York. She had the evidence, the legal knowledge, and most importantly, the absolute certainty that she was fighting for justice. Not just for her family, but for everyone Richard Blackwood had ever hurt. The David and Goliath story was about to reach its climax. And this time, David was a 16-year-old girl with 17 notebooks, full of righteous fury. The Rodriguez family's fall from modest comfort to desperate poverty had been swift and merciless. It was like a house of cards, collapsing in agonizing, slow motion. Emma remembered the exact moment their old life ended, October 15th, 2018. The day Papa came home 2 hours early with a cardboard box and eyes red from crying. "I don't have a job anymore, mi amor," Miguel had told Sophia in Spanish, thinking 10-year-old Emma wouldn't understand. But Emma had been taking advanced Spanish classes, and every word had cut through her young heart like a knife. The first month hadn't been so bad. Papa had savings, $6,000 they'd been putting away for their house, down payment. He'd applied for jobs confidently, certain his 15 years of experience and spotless record would open doors quickly. But Richard Blackwood's reach extended far beyond his own company. Every accounting firm in New York had somehow heard that Miguel Rodriguez was unreliable, difficult to work with, or possibly even involved in financial irregularities himself. The rejections came without interviews, sometimes without any explanation at all. By Christmas 2018, the savings were gone. They'd moved from their comfortable 2-bedroom apartment to a cramped 1-bedroom in a rougher neighborhood. Emma gave up her room without complaint, sleeping on the worn-out couch while her parents took the bedroom. She'd wrapped her few Christmas presents in newspaper, pretending it was a fun, artistic project. "It's just temporary," Papa had promised, his voice lacking its usual confidence. But Emma could see the fear growing in his eyes. The second year was worse. Sophia took a job at the grocery store, working split shifts to maximize hours. Miguel finally found part-time work as a bookkeeper for a small restaurant, making in a week what he'd once earned in a single day. Emma learned to cook rice and beans, 17 different ways to stretch their meager grocery budget. She watched her parents age rapidly under the crushing weight of stress. Papa's hair went completely gray. He developed a nervous habit of checking over his shoulder wherever they went, convinced Richard's people were watching them. Mama's hands became permanently raw and stained from cleaning chemicals at her second job. She started falling asleep during dinner, exhausted from working 14-hour days. The worst part for Emma wasn't the hunger or the cramped apartment or wearing the same 3 outfits to school in rotation. The worst part was watching her. Parents blamed themselves for their family's destruction. "I should have kept my mouth shut," Miguel would whisper to Sophia late at night, not knowing Emma was awake, on the couch, listening to every painful word. "I should have just looked the other way, like everyone else." "No, mi amor," Sophia would reply, her own voice thick with unshed tears as she stroked his hair. "You did the right thing. Somehow God will make this right." But God seemed to be taking his time, and Emma had decided to help him along. The heart attack had happened on a Tuesday in March 2023. Emma had been at school when the dreaded call came. Papa had collapsed at the restaurant, clutching his chest and gasping for air. She'd run 12 blocks to the hospital, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, pure fear, making her legs move faster than they ever had before. The doctor had been gentle but direct. "Your father's heart is weak from prolonged stress. He needs medication, rest, and absolutely no emotional pressure." Another attack could be fatal. That night, as Papa slept in his hospital bed connected to a web of monitors, Emma had made a solemn vow. She was done watching Richard Blackwood destroy her family. She was only 15 years old, but she was going to find a way to fight back. The medical bills had been catastrophic. Even with Medicaid, the copays and medications cost $300 a month, money they simply didn't have. Papa couldn't work anymore, which meant Sophia had to find a third job, cleaning offices late at night. Emma started babysitting for neighbors, using her earnings to buy used law books from second-hand bookstores. "Why are you reading all these boring books?" her friend Jessica had asked one day, finding Emma studying contract law during their lunch break. "I'm going to be a lawyer," Emma had said simply. "That's so cool. My cousin's in law school." "Are you thinking about Yale or Harvard?" Emma had smiled sadly. Something like that. What she hadn't told Jessica, what she couldn't tell anyone, was that she wasn't planning to wait for law school. She was planning to become a lawyer right now by sheer necessity and fierce determination. Her family couldn't wait 7 years for justice. They might not survive 7 more months. Every evening as Mama left for her cleaning job and Papa dozed fitfully in his chair, Emma transformed their tiny living room into a law library. She'd studied corporate law, securities fraud, and federal statutes until her eyes burned. She'd memorized court procedures and practiced legal arguments in front of the cracked bathroom mirror. She'd also begun her own investigation into Richard Blackwood's empire, using her school's computer lab to research public records and financial filings. Piece by piece, she'd assembled a damning picture of systematic fraud spanning nearly a decade. One day, she'd whispered to Papa one night when his medication made him confused and frightened, "I'm going to make the man who hurt us pay for what he did. I promise you, Papa, I'm going to make this right." Miguel had smiled weakly, patting her hand with fingers that trembled from medication side effects. "My little lawyer," he'd mumbled, his voice slurred but full of love. "So smart, Mia. So brave." Emma had kissed his forehead, tasting the salt from her own silent tears. "Rest, Papa. Your daughter's got this now." Sitting in that courthouse, preparing to face the most powerful man she'd ever encountered, Emma carried with her not just evidence and legal knowledge. She carried the weight of every sacrifice her family had made, every meager dinner of rice and beans, every night Mama had cried herself to sleep, every time Papa had checked over his shoulder in fear. Richard Blackwood had thought he'd destroyed the Rodriguez family. He was about to discover that sometimes when you try to crush people completely, you just make them stronger. The moment Emma had been preparing for arrived on a gray Monday morning in late October. The courthouse was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and employees from Blackwood Industries. They'd all gotten word that something unprecedented was happening in Judge Morrison's courtroom. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table, her 17 notebooks organized in neat stacks. Her father's evidence was carefully arranged in labeled manila folders. She wore the same borrowed blazer from her first appearance. But today she'd added a small pin to the lapel, a tiny American flag that had belonged to her grandfather. A reminder of why her family had come to this country in the first place, searching for a better life. Richard Blackwood had assembled a new legal team overnight. 3 of Manhattan's most expensive and ruthless attorneys. They were led by Victoria Chen, a woman legendary for destroying opponents with surgical precision. They sat at the defense table like an army in $1,000 suits. Their gleaming briefcases worth more than Emma's family's annual income were lined up before them, like shields. "The defense is ready to proceed, Your Honor," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case that mattered. Judge Morrison looked at Emma with barely concealed concern. "Miss E. Rodriguez, are you certain you wish to proceed without professional legal representation?" Emma stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom on her 16-year-old frame. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm ready." "Very well, Miss Rodriguez. You may present your opening statement." Emma walked to the center of the courtroom, her sneakers making no sound on the vast marble floor. For a fleeting moment she felt the crushing weight of the situation. A teenager from Queens about to take on one of the most powerful men in America. Then she remembered Papa's tired face in the hospital, Mama's raw-stained hands, and all the families whose lives had been destroyed while Richard Blackwood bought another yacht. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Emma began, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm here to tell you about the biggest theft in New York corporate history. Not a bank robbery or a jewelry heist. Those crimes get attention because they're dramatic. The crime I'm here to discuss was committed quietly over years against working families who trusted their employer with their futures." She walked to her table and picked up a photograph. It was of the 17 families she'd interviewed standing together outside the courthouse. "These are the victims of Richard Blackwood's greed. Maria Santos, whose husband died because their health insurance was secretly canceled. Frank Morrison, who lost his home when his pension payments suddenly stopped. The Patterson family, whose daughter had to drop out of college when her education fund vanished. And my father, Miguel Rodriguez, who discovered this theft and was destroyed for trying to stop it." Emma moved closer to the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "Mr. Blackwood's lawyers will tell you this is a complex financial case, too complicated for ordinary people to understand. They'll use big words and technical terms to confuse you. But the truth is simple. Richard Blackwood stole $43 million from his own employees. And when my father discovered it, Mr. Blackwood tried to silence him with threats and intimidation." Victoria Chen rose smoothly from her seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The plaintiff is making wild accusations without a shred of evidence." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison ruled. "This is an opening statement." Emma smiled slightly. "Oh, I have evidence, Your Honor. 17 notebooks full of evidence. Bank records, email communications, recorded conversations, and the testimony of former employees who were too scared to speak before. Now." She returned to her table and held up a thick binder. "This contains 8 years of financial records showing exactly how the money was stolen. Shell companies with names similar to legitimate vendors. Fake invoices for services never provided. Payments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It's all here documented in Mr. Blackwood's own records," Richard whispered urgently to Victoria, his face a mask of fury. But Emma continued, her voice resonating through the silent room. "But this case isn't really about money. It's about justice. It's about whether powerful people can destroy honest families and get away with it. It's about whether a 16-year-old girl from Queens can stand up to a billionaire and Demand accountability, Emma paused, looking directly at Richard. For the first time since beginning, her statement, Mr. Blackwood thought he'd silenced my family. When he fired my father and blacklisted him from every accounting firm in the city, he thought he'd broken us when Papa had his heart attack from the stress. When Mama had to work 3 jobs just to pay for his medicine. When we lost our home and our savings. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the pain and determination of 6 long years of struggle. But what Mr. Blackwood didn't understand is that sometimes when you try to destroy a family completely, you just teach their children how to fight back. Today, justice isn't being served by expensive lawyers or powerful connections. Today, justice is being served by a girl who learned law from library books because she couldn't afford to let her family's story end in silence. Emma returned to her seat, her opening statement complete. The courtroom was absolutely silent for a long moment before Judge Morrison spoke. Thank you, Miss Rodriguez. Miss Chen, your opening statement. As Victoria Chen rose to defend Richard Blackwood, a sense of calm settled over Emma. The battle was joined, and there was no turning back now. Everything her family had suffered, every hour she'd spent studying, every sacrifice they'd made had led to this moment. The girl from Queens was ready to show the world that sometimes David really could defeat Goliath, especially when David had the truth, the evidence, and nothing left to lose. The real fight was just beginning. Victoria Chen's opening statement was a masterclass in legal misdirection. It was delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a shark. She stood before the jury in her perfectly tailored navy suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that gave her an almost regal appearance. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Victoria began, her voice carrying decades of courtroom authority. What you're witnessing today is not justice. It's a carefully orchestrated publicity stunt. It's designed to destroy an innocent man's reputation and legacy. Emma felt her stomach tighten as Victoria's words filled the courtroom with doubt. Miss Rodriguez is a sympathetic figure. I'll grant you that. A young girl trying to help her struggling family. But sympathy doesn't change facts. And the facts are these. Miguel Rodriguez was terminated for cause after displaying erratic behavior and making unfounded accusations against his employer. Victoria moved toward the jury box with calculated confidence. Richard Blackwood built Blackwood Industries from nothing over 30 years, creating jobs for over 3,000 families. He's donated millions to charity, supported community programs, and maintained the highest ethical standards throughout his career. The idea that this man would jeopardize everything he's built to steal money he doesn't even need is simply absurd. Emma scribbled notes frantically, knowing Victoria was just getting started. The defense will show that every transaction, every payment, every financial decision was made in accordance with industry standards and federal regulations. Mr. Rodriguez, struggling with personal problems and facing performance issues, misinterpreted routine business practices as something sinister. Victoria paused, dramatically letting her words sink in. Furthermore, will demonstrate that Thomas Sterling, Mr. Blackwood's former attorney, has his own selfish reasons for providing false testimony. His law firm is facing bankruptcy, and he's desperate to shift blame for his own financial misconduct onto his former client. This was news to Emma. She glanced at Thomas sitting in the gallery and saw his face go pale. Most importantly, Victoria continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation, we'll show that this entire case is based on documents obtained through illegal means, recorded conversations made without consent, and testimony from disgruntled former employees who've been coached to support a false narrative. Emma's heart sank. Victoria was systematically destroying her case before she'd even presented a single piece of evidence. When this trial concludes, you'll see that Richard Blackwood is not a criminal. He's a victim of a vindictive former employee and his daughter's misguided quest for revenge. Thank you, Victoria returned to her seat with the cool satisfaction of someone who'd just delivered a knockout punch in the first round. Judge Morrison looked at Emma sympathetically. Miss Rodriguez, you may call your first witness. Emma stood on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of Victoria's words pressing down on her like a physical force. The packed courtroom suddenly felt hostile, filled with people who now saw her as either a naive child or a manipulative fraud. Your Honor, I call Maria Santos to the stand. Maria Santos was 58 years old, with graying hair and hands weathered by years of hard work. She'd been a seamstress at Blackwood Industries for 15 years, before the company's restructuring eliminated her position and, more importantly, her late husband's health benefits. Mrs. Santos, Emma began gently, can you tell the court about your husband, Carlos? Carlos worked for Blackwood Industries for 22 years, Maria said, her heavily accented English clear despite her nervousness. He was a good man, a hard worker. When he got diabetes, the company insurance covered his medicine. And what happened to that coverage? Victoria rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Your Honor, Emma replied, her voice firm. This directly relates to the theft of employee benefit funds. I'll allow it. Please answer, Mrs. Santos. Maria's voice grew stronger, fueled by memory and grief. In 2019, they told us the insurance was, how you say, restructured. Carlos's medicine went from $20 a month to $600 a month. We couldn't afford it. Emma felt the jury's attention sharpen. What happened to Carlos? He rationed his insulin to make it last longer, Maria said, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. In February 2020, he went into a diabetic coma. He died 3 days later. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Emma could see several jury members dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Mrs. Santos, did you later discover what happened to the insurance funds? Objection! Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Morrison ruled reluctantly. Emma adjusted her approach. Mrs. Santos, I'm showing you Exhibit A, an internal Blackwood Industries. Memo dated January 2019. Can you read the highlighted section? Maria squinted at the document. It says, employee, health premiums to be redirected to executive compensation fund pending. Restructuring completion. The gallery erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for order. Victoria was on her feet instantly. Your Honor, we object to the admission of this document. There's no chain of custody, no authentication. Your Honor, Emma interrupted, pulling out another thick folder. I have the complete email chain showing this memo's creation, distribution, and approval. Every step is documented with timestamps and digital signatures. Judge Morrison examined the documents carefully. I'll allow it. Continue, Miss Rodriguez. Emma felt a surge of confidence. Victoria's perfectly crafted defense was about to meet the harsh reality of documented evidence. Mrs. Santos, how did Carlos's death affect your family? We lost our house to pay the medical bills. I live with my daughter now in her basement. Carlos worked 22 years for Mr. Blackwood, and when he needed help the most, Maria's voice broke completely. My husband died because someone stole the money that was supposed to save his life. As Maria stepped down from the witness stand, Emma saw something shift in the jury's faces. Victoria's sophisticated arguments about business practices and financial procedures suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless compared to a widow's tears and a man's preventable death. The battle was far from over, but Emma had drawn first blood. She had 11 more witnesses, each with their own story of loss and betrayal. By the time she was finished, the jury would understand that this wasn't about complex financial regulations. It was about greed so callous that it counted human lives as acceptable collateral damage. Richard Blackwood sat at the defense table, his confident mask beginning to slip as he realized that his money and power might not be enough to silence the voices of the people he'd destroyed. The real fight was just beginning. Frank Morrison had been a loyal Blackwood Industries employee for 18 years when his world collapsed in a single phone call. Now 63 years old, he walked to the witness stand with the careful gait of a man whose body had been broken by years of manual labor and recent heartbreak. "Mr. Morrison," Emma began, "please tell the court about your employment at Blackwood Industries." Frank's voice was gravelly from decades of smoking, but his words were clear. "I started in 2006 as a machine operator. Worked my way up to floor supervisor. Never missed a day unless I was sick. Never caused trouble. Mr. Blackwood himself shook my hand at my 15-year anniversary dinner." Emma nodded encouragingly. "Did you contribute to the company pension plan? Every paycheck for 18 years. The company matched 50 cents for every dollar I put in. By 2020, my pension account was worth almost $400,000. Enough to retire, comfortable, maybe buy a little place down in Florida with my wife, Janet." "What happened in September 2020? Frank's face hardened. "Got a letter saying the pension fund was being temporarily restructured due to market conditions. Said our benefits would be preserved, but payments would be delayed 6 months while they reorganized." Victoria Chin was taking notes furiously, clearly preparing her cross-examination. "Did you receive your pension payments after 6 months?" Emma asked. "No. Got another letter saying there were additional complications and asking for another year's patience. Then Janet got sick." Emma could see the raw pain in Frank's eyes as he remembered. "Tell the court about Janet's illness, pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March 2021. The treatment was expensive, even with Medicare. We needed that pension money for her care. But every time I called Blackwood Industries, they gave me the runaround. Under review, processing delays, market, volatility, always some excuse. What ultimately happened to Janet?" Frank's voice cracked and he wiped at his eyes with a rough hand. "She died in October 2021. We'd exhausted our savings, taken out a second mortgage on the house. She spent her last months worrying about money instead of focusing on getting better." The courtroom was hushed. Emma could see tears in several of the jury members' eyes. "Mr. Morrison, I'm showing you Exhibit B, a bank statement from September 2020, the same month you were told about the pension fund problems. Can you identify this account?" Frank studied the document. "That's a Cayman Islands account in the name of Blackwood Holdings, subsidiary 47. Shows a deposit of $12.3 million on September 15th, 2020. Is that amount significant?" "According to my calculations, that's almost exactly the amount that was supposed to be in our pension fund at that time." Victoria shot to her feet. "Objection. The witness is not qualified to make such determinations." "Your Honor," Emma replied calmly. "Mr. Morrison was a floor supervisor with access to the pension fund's quarterly reports. He's simply reading public documents." "I'll allow it, Judge," Morrison ruled. Emma continued. "Mr. Morrison, what's your current financial situation?" "I lost the house last year. I'm living in a one-bedroom apartment, working part-time at a hardware store. At 63 years old, I'm starting over with nothing because the money I worked 18 years to earn just disappeared." Emma walked to her table and picked up another thick folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C, comprehensive bank records showing the systematic transfer of pension funds from legitimate investment accounts to shell companies controlled by Richard Blackwood." Victoria was on her feet immediately. "Objection. How did a 16-year-old girl obtain confidential banking records from the Cayman Islands?" Emma smiled slightly. "Through legitimate Freedom of Information Act requests, subpoenas filed in accordance with federal civil procedure and records provided voluntarily by Thomas Sterling as part of his cooperation with this case." Judge Morrison examined the documents. "These appear to be properly obtained." "I'll allow them," Emma addressed the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen, these records show that between 2018 and 2022, Richard Blackwood systematically emptied the pension accounts belonging to over 200 employees, transferring the money to his personal accounts in offshore tax havens. She held up a large chart she'd prepared. This graph shows the direct correlation between employee pension contributions and deposit into Mr. Blackwood's personal accounts. Every time these workers put money into their retirement funds, equivalent amounts appeared in accounts controlled by the defendant. Richard whispered urgently to Victoria, his face turning blotchy red. But Emma pressed on. Frank Morrison worked 18 years believing his pension was safe. Janet Morrison died thinking they'd lost their retirement to market forces. But the truth is simpler and far more heartbreaking. Their money was stolen by the very man they trusted to protect their future. As Frank stepped down from the witness stand, Emma felt the momentum shifting decisively in her favor. Victoria's sophisticated legal arguments were crumbling against the relentless weight of documented evidence and raw human suffering. But Emma knew Victoria wasn't finished fighting. The real counterattack was coming. And when it arrived, it would test everything Emma had learned about the law, about justice, and about herself. In the gallery, she caught sight of her parents. Papa's face showed a mixture of pride and fear, while Mama clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer for her daughter's safety. They'd sacrificed everything to get to this moment. Emma couldn't afford to lose now. Victoria Chen's cross-examination of Frank Morrison was surgical in its precision and devastating in its effectiveness. She rose from her chair like a predator that had been patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. Mr. Morrison, Victoria began, her voice deceptively gentle. You mentioned that you never missed work unless you were sick. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And how many sick days did you take in your final 2 years at Blackwood Industries? Frank shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure exactly. My back was bothering me. According to your employment records, you took 47 sick days in 2019 and 2020. That's nearly a day and a half per month. Does that sound like a dedicated employee to you? Emma felt her stomach drop. She hadn't known about Frank's attendance issues. I was having health problems, Frank protested. My doctor said, yes, let's talk about your health problems. Victoria interrupted smoothly. You mentioned a drinking problem in your disability application, didn't you? Objection, Emma shot to her feet. Relevance, Your Honor. This goes directly to the witness's credibility and his ability to accurately remember events, Victoria replied coolly. I'll allow it, Judge Morrison ruled, her expression grim. Victoria continued relentlessly. Mr. Morrison, isn't it true that you were attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings during your final year at Blackwood Industries? Frank's face flushed a deep red. That has nothing to do with my pension. And isn't it true that you were warned multiple times about arriving at work under the influence of alcohol? I never. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit D1, a disciplinary report dated March 15, 2020, documenting Mr. Morrison's intoxication during work hours. Emma's heart sank as she watched the jury's sympathy for Frank evaporate. Victoria was systematically destroying his credibility. Mr. Morrison, Victoria pressed on. You testified that your pension was worth almost $400,000, but according to these official fund statements which you signed off on, your account balance was actually $137,000. Were you lying to the jury, or do you simply not remember accurately? Frank looked confused and utterly defeated. The statements I had showed, you thought wrong, didn't you? Just like you were wrong about seeing Mr. Blackwood steal money that was never actually there. Emma tried to object, but Victoria was already moving to her next target. No further questions, Your Honor. As Frank stepped down from the witness stand, Emma could see the damage had been done. The jury looked skeptical now. wondering what other facts might not hold up under scrutiny. Emma's next witness was supposed to be Patricia Williams, a former Blackwood Industries accountant who'd been fired for asking too many questions. But as Patricia took the stand, Emma noticed Victoria's satisfied smile and felt a chill of foreboding. "Miss Williams," Emma began, trying to sound confident. "How long did you work for Blackwood Industries?" 3 years, from 2019 to 2022. "And what were your responsibilities?" "I managed accounts payable and helped prepare quarterly financial reports." "Did you notice any irregularities in the company's financial records?" Patricia hesitated, glancing nervously at Victoria. "Well, there were some discrepancies that I reported to my supervisor." "What kind of discrepancies?" "Payments to vendors I couldn't verify. Transfers that didn't match our internal records." Emma felt the case getting back on track. "Did you document these concerns?" "Yes. I prepared a detailed report in January 2022. "And what happened when you submitted this report?" Patricia's voice grew smaller. "I was called into HR the next day and terminated for performance issues." Victoria rose from cross-examination with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "Ms. Williams, you mentioned performance issues. Can you tell the jury about the $63,000 in company funds that went missing while you were managing accounts payable?" Emma's blood ran cold. Patricia's face went white as a sheet. That was an accounting error. I corrected it as soon as..." "Did you correct it before or after the FBI investigation into your personal financial activities?" "Objection," Emma called out desperately. "Relevance, Your Honor. This directly relates to the witness's credibility and possible motives for false testimony," Victoria countered smoothly. "I'll allow it." Victoria moved in for the kill. "Miss Williams, isn't it true that you're currently under federal investigation for embezzlement? And isn't it true that you've agreed to testify against Mr. Blackwood in exchange for immunity from prosecution?" Patricia broke down, completely sobbing uncontrollably. "I never meant to. It was just a loan. I was going to pay it back." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Emma felt her carefully constructed case collapsing around her. Victoria had somehow discovered compromising information about every one of her key witnesses, systematically destroying their credibility. As Patricia fled the witness stand, in tears, Emma realized she was fighting an opponent with resources and connections far beyond anything she could have imagined. Victoria hadn't just prepared a defense. She'd conducted a full-scale private investigation into Emma's witnesses, finding the ammunition to destroy each one. Emma looked at her remaining witness list with a growing sense of despair. If Victoria could discredit Frank Morrison and Patricia Williams so easily, what devastating revelations did she have waiting for the others? For the first time since beginning this impossible fight, Emma wondered if a 16-year-old girl from Queens was really capable of bringing down one of the most powerful men in America. The clean, clear legal system she'd studied in books was proving to be far more brutal and unforgiving in reality. But as she caught sight of her father in the gallery, pale and fragile but watching her with infinite love and pride, Emma steeled herself for the battle ahead. She might be outgunned and outmaneuvered, but she still had one weapon Victoria couldn't take away from her: the truth. The question was whether the truth would be enough to overcome money, power, and the most ruthless legal team in New York. The revelation that nearly destroyed Emma's case came from the last person she ever expected, Thomas Sterling himself. It was Wednesday morning, and Emma had spent the previous night frantically reorganizing her witness list after Victoria's devastating cross-examinations. 2 more of her witnesses had been discredited, one for tax evasion, another for lying on a loan application. Emma was beginning to suspect that Richard Blackwood's insidious reach extended far deeper than she'd ever imagined. She was about to call her next witness when Victoria Chen stood up. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call Thomas Sterling to the stand." Emma's blood ran cold. Thomas was supposed to be her star witness, the insider who would corroborate everything with his first-hand knowledge of Richard's crimes. But as she watched him walk to the witness stand, something in his defeated demeanor sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. Victoria approached Thomas with the feigned deference due to a respected colleague. "Mr. Sterling, please state your profession for the record." "I'm a practicing attorney with 25 years of experience in corporate law," Thomas replied, his voice steady, but his eyes actively avoiding Emma's gaze. "And what was your relationship to the defendant, Richard Blackwood?" "I served as his personal attorney and legal counsel for 20 years, from 2004 to 2024. "Mr. Sterling, you recently provided documents to Miss Rodriguez that form the very basis of her case against Mr. Blackwood. Can you tell the court how those documents were obtained?" Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This wasn't going the way she'd expected at all. Thomas cleared his throat. I created them." The courtroom erupted in gasps and urgent whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel furiously for order. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, feigning confusion. "Did you say you created them?" "Yes. The bank statements, the email communications, the financial records that Miss Rodriguez has been presenting, I fabricated them all. I used my knowledge of corporate accounting and Mr. Blackwood's business practices to make them look authentic." Emma shot to her feet, her voice breaking with betrayal. "That's not true, Thomas. Tell them the truth. Tell them about the real evidence, about what Richard did to my father." But Thomas was looking directly at her now, and she could see the shame in something else, something terrifying in his eyes, fear. "Miss Rodriguez," Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger as if reciting a script, "is a remarkable young woman who genuinely believes she's fighting for justice. But in my own guilt over other matters, I provided her with false documents to support a case that simply doesn't exist." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "And what other matters are you referring to, Mr. Sterling?" "I've been embezzling funds from my law firm's client trust account for the past 3 years. I'm facing disbarment and criminal charges. When I saw Miss Rodriguez's passion for her father's situation, I thought I could use her case to deflect attention from my own crimes." Emma felt like she was drowning. Every single piece of evidence she had built her case on was being systematically destroyed right before her eyes. "So to be clear," Victoria said, her voice dripping with mock solemnity, "the supposed evidence of Mr. Blackwood's financial crimes was entirely fabricated by you to cover your own embezzlement?" "Yes. Richard Blackwood is completely innocent of the charges being brought against him. I take full responsibility for misleading Miss Rodriguez in this court." Emma's world collapsed in that single moment. Months of relentless preparation, her family's hopes, her unwavering belief in justice, all of it crumbling to dust because the one man she'd trusted had betrayed her in the most devastating way possible. But then, something Thomas said struck her as wrong. She'd been studying his mannerisms for months, and she knew when he was lying. The way he held his shoulders, the slight tremor in his left hand, the careful way he avoided looking at Richard, these were the same tells she'd noticed when he'd lied to judges about case schedules. Emma stood up slowly, her mind racing. "Mr. Sterling, you said you've been embezzling from client trust accounts for 3 years. Victoria tried to object. "Your Honor, Miss Rodriguez doesn't have the right to cross-examine her." "Oh, actually," Judge Morrison interjected, her eyes narrowed. "Since Mr. Sterling was originally intended to be Miss Rodriguez's witness, and given these extraordinary circumstances, she absolutely has that right." Emma approached the witness stand, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mr. Sterling, can you tell the court the name of your law firm's bank?" Thomas hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Metropolitan Trust and Savings." "And the account number for your client. Trust fund? Another hesitation. I don't recall the exact number. Offhand. Emma walked back to her table and picked up her phone. Your Honor, I'd like to make a brief call to verify Mr. Sterling's testimony. Objection, Victoria was on her feet. This is highly irregular. Your Honor, Emma said, calmly, her voice cutting through the noise. If Mr. Sterling is telling the truth about embezzling from Metropolitan Trust and Savings, that information should be readily verifiable. Judge Morrison looked intrigued. I'll allow a brief verification. Emma dialed information and asked to be connected to Metropolitan Trust and Savings. After a brief, quiet conversation, she hung up and faced the court. Your Honor, Metropolitan Trust and Savings has no record of Sterling Chen and Associates having any accounts with their institution. In fact, Mr. Sterling's firm banks with First National, and their client trust account has never shown any irregularities. The courtroom was dead silent. Thomas's face had gone a deathly shade of gray. Emma pressed her advantage, her voice filled with a newfound power. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that Richard Blackwood offered you something to change your testimony? Money to cover your firm's actual financial problems? Or maybe threats against your family? No, isn't it true that everything you told me was real and you're only lying now because Richard Blackwood has found a way to pressure you? Thomas's composure finally cracked. Emma, please, you don't understand what he's capable of. My daughter, Sarah, she's only 14. He showed me pictures of her, walking to school, her daily routine. He said, objection. Victoria screamed, but it was too late. He said if I didn't recant my testimony, Sarah would have an accident, Thomas yelled, tear streaming down his face. Just like what happened to your father's first witness back in 2018, the one who died in that suspicious car crash. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Richard Blackwood was shouting obscenities at his lawyers. Victoria was demanding a recess. Reporters were frantically scribbling notes about witness intimidation and threats against children. But Emma heard only one thing, clearly. The truth was finally coming out. Judge Morrison was banging her gavel repeatedly. Order, order in my courtroom. As security guards moved to restrain Richard, who was now lunging toward Thomas Sterling, Emma realized that her case hadn't been destroyed. It had just been proven beyond any shadow of a doubt. The most powerful man in the room had just revealed in front of the entire world exactly how far he would go to silence the truth. The emergency recess that followed, Thomas Sterling's explosive testimony stretched into the afternoon. Judge Morrison met with attorneys from the district attorney's office about the immediate criminal charges for witness intimidation. Emma sat in the courthouse cafeteria, her hands still shaking, as she tried to process what had just happened. Mija, Papa said, softly, sitting beside her with a cup of coffee he couldn't afford. Are you okay? Emma looked at her. Father, the man whose quiet courage had started this whole fight 6 years ago and felt a mixture of triumph and terror. Papa, did you know about the other witness, the one who died in 2018? Miguel's face darkened with a painful memory. Carlos Mendoza. He was a good man, worked in the accounting department with me. He'd found some of the same irregularities I did. We were planning to go to the authorities together. Miguel paused, staring into his coffee as if seeing the past. 3 days before we were supposed to meet. With the FBI, his car went off the Queensboro Bridge. They said he fell asleep at the wheel. But you didn't believe that. Carlos never drove when he was tired. He was the most careful driver I knew. And his brake lines? Miguel shook his head. The police report said they were old, corroded. But Carlos had just had his car serviced the week before. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Papa, why didn't you ever tell me about this? Because I was terrified, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Terrified that if Richard Blackwood could do that to Carlos, he could do it to us. When he threatened our family that day in his office, I knew he wasn't bluffing. Sophia appeared at their table, having rushed over from her job at the grocery store, still wearing her name tag. Emma, me, Amor, what's happening? The news is saying something about death. Threats, Emma quickly explained. The morning's shocking events, watching her mother's face grow pale with each detail. Dios mío, Sophia whispered, crossing herself. Emma, maybe we should stop this. If this man is capable of murder... No, Mama. Emma's voice was firm, despite her own fear. Don't you see? This proves everything. Richard Blackwood just admitted in open court that he's willing to threaten children to protect his secrets. The jury heard him. The whole world heard him. A new voice interrupted their family discussion. She's right, Mrs. Rodriguez. They turned to see a woman in her 40s approaching their table. She had the tough, no-nonsense look of a career police officer. Detective Maria Sanchez, she said, sitting down uninvited and flashing her badge. NYPD Financial Crimes. Miss Rodriguez, I've been following your case with great interest. What happened in that courtroom today changes everything. Emma leaned forward eagerly. What do you mean? Mr. Blackwood's outburst, his threats against Mr. Sterling's daughter, and especially his reference to Carlos Mendoza's death. That's given us probable cause to reopen the Mendoza investigation as a potential homicide and launch a full criminal inquiry into Blackwood Industries. Detective Sanchez placed her badge on the table. As of 1 hour ago, Richard Blackwood is under arrest for witness intimidation, making terroristic threats, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. We're also investigating his potential involvement in Carlos Mendoza's death. Miguel's eyes filled with tears. After all these years, there's more, Detective, Sanchez continued. Your civil case has provided us with more than enough evidence to get a warrant to freeze all of Blackwood's personal and corporate assets. Every penny he stole is going to be recovered and returned to the victims. Emma felt a strange sensation, as if a massive weight she'd been carrying for 6 years was finally lifting from her shoulders. What about the people who lost everything? Frank Morrison, Maria Santos, all the others? They'll get their money back, plus punitive damages for the years of hardship they endured. Your case, Miss Rodriguez, has created a legal framework for recovering stolen pension funds that will help thousands of people across the country. Sophia was crying now, clutching Emma's hand tightly. Mija, you did it. You actually did it, Detective. Sanchez stood to leave, then paused. Miss Rodriguez, I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people try to fight the system. Most of them fail, but you didn't just learn the rules. You used them better than lawyers, with decades of experience. As the detective walked away, Emma felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Thomas Sterling, looking haggard but finally relieved. Emma, he said quietly, I owe you an apology and an explanation. Emma studied his face. Are you going to tell me the truth this time? Yes. Richard approached me 3 weeks ago. He discovered that my law firm was struggling financially, not from embezzlement, just bad investments, and the economic pressure from the pandemic. He offered to bail us out in exchange for discrediting you in court. Thomas sat down heavily. When I refused, he had someone follow my daughter to school. They sent me photos of her daily routine, her friends, the route she walks home. The message was clear: cooperate or Sarah would be hurt. So you decided to sacrifice my family to save yours, Emma said, not with accusation, but with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much adult corruption. For about 2 hours, yes, he confessed, shamefaced. But sitting in that courtroom watching you fight with nothing but the truth, I remembered why I became a lawyer in the first place. To protect people like your family from people like him. Thomas pulled out a thick envelope. These are the real documents. Emma. Bank records, email communications, recorded conversations. Everything I originally gave you, plus the things I was holding back for my own protection. Richard Blackwood is going to prison for a very, very long time. As Emma took the envelope, she realized that her fight was finally over. Not just because she'd won in court, though she had, but because the truth had become too big to hide, too loud to silence, too powerful for even Richard Blackwood's money and connections to suppress. Tomorrow she would return to being a 16-year-old girl worried about homework and college applications. But tonight she was the daughter who'd kept her promise to her father and delivered justice to a man who thought himself untouchable. The David and Goliath story was nearing its end. And for once, the little guy had won. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez stood on the same courthouse steps where her incredible journey had begun, but now everything was different. The marble floors inside still gleamed, but today they reflected the smiling faces of vindicated victims, not desperate plaintiffs. Richard Blackwood had been sentenced to 25 years in a federal prison. The judge in his sentencing had called his crimes a betrayal of trust so fundamental that it strikes at the very heart of our economic system. Blackwood Industries had been liquidated, with all assets going toward a massive victim compensation fund. Frank Morrison approached Emma, walking with a new spring in his step. At 64, he looked 10 years younger, as if the weight of injustice had physically aged him. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Janet would have been so proud of you." He had received his recovered pension funds, plus significant damages. He'd already bought a small house in Florida, just like he and Janet had dreamed, and was volunteering with a program that helped seniors avoid financial scams. Maria Santos was there too, her arm around her daughter. The recovered funds came too late to save her husband, but Maria had used her settlement to establish a foundation providing emergency medical assistance to families in need. "My Carlos is at peace now," she told Emma, tears of gratitude streaming down her weathered cheeks. "He knows the truth." Came out one by one. The victims approached Emma and her family, sharing their stories of recovery and hope. But the moment that meant the most came when Sarah Sterling, Thomas's 14-year-old daughter, shyly walked up to them. "Miss Rodriguez," she said hesitantly, "my dad says you saved my life by being brave enough to catch him in a lie. Your dad saved your life by being brave enough to tell the truth in the end," Emma replied gently. "That took the most courage of all." Thomas Sterling, now working for a legal aid society, nodded in agreement, a quiet peace on his face. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma found herself alone with her parents on the steps. The city of Queens was just across the river, but it felt a world away from where they were 6 months ago. They had their new house now, a modest but beautiful home with a small yard, just as Poppy had promised. Emma's room was painted a bright, hopeful yellow. "So what now, Mia?" Sophia asked, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Emma looked out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about all the powerful people in those gleaming towers who might be counting on silence and fear to protect their secrets. "Now," Emma said with a smile, "I finish high school. And then I go to law school for real." She pulled an envelope from her bag. It was an early acceptance letter with a full scholarship to Columbia University's law program. "There are a lot more Richard Blackwoods out there," she said, her voice filled with a quiet fire. "And they're all about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most money or the best connections." Papa squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with pride. "It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." "Exactly," Emma agreed. Life had taught her that security was an illusion. But dreams backed by fierce determination and unwavering courage, those could become reality. The scales of justice had been balanced at last, and it had taken a daughter's love, a teenager's courage, and the unshakable belief that truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always rise to the surface. Emma's story is a powerful reminder that one person's courage can truly change the world. If her incredible journey inspired you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more amazing stories that prove that a single voice can make a difference. Thank you for watching.